Learning is not a spectator sport. My name is Carly Davis, and I'm a junior here at Meredith College. I'm a child development major getting my K-6 teaching license. My thesis is Learning is not a spectator sport. I have been studying student engagement in elementary classrooms through different instructional opportunities. For my presentation, I'm going to highlight on 4 of the studies I used for my thesis. Study number 1, conducted by Ada, Reyes, and Davis, looked in on the classrooms with flexible seating and observed students' overall persona. They had 3 conclusions from their study. The first being that students in flexible seating classrooms had an overall more positive attitude towards learning. The second conclusion being flexible furniture provided more support for student choice and movement. And lastly, professional development was needed to maximize the benefits associated with flexible furniture. Study number 2, conducted by Jacobson and Lauricella, looked into students reading on their iPad on an app called Epic. Epic is an app with hundreds of children's books. The 2 researchers took notes while the students were on this app. They noted that students were sitting in their chairs, eyes were fixed on the screens, and students were not touching or fidgeting with any other objects. Study number 3, conducted by Wu, looked in on small group engagement within a classroom. He looked at each gender specifically when looking in on these small groups. He had done previous research and found that typically girls are more engaged in classrooms than boys. However, when looking in on small groups on his study, he found that both genders were actively engaged in participating in their group discussions. He noted that students like to discuss and figure out the answers. Lastly, the study conducted by Sabat, he defined and looked into student engagement. He says how students are engaged refers to the degree of students being enthusiastic, curious, optimistic, motivated, and interested. So what is engagement? Engagement in the classrooms has the meaning of students being enthusiastic, curious, optimistic, motivated, and interested, as previously said in the slide before by Sabat. When looking at student engagement, researchers ask themselves many questions such as, how much are students paying attention? How curious are they? Do they seem interested in the topic? And are students showing passion in what they are learning? When engagement is not strong in the classroom, learning starts to suffer. Methods. This study examined students in grades 1st through 3rd in the following instructional opportunities: small group, independent work, technology, all-day flexible seating, and flexible seating part-time. When going into the different classrooms, I wanted to see when or where students were most engaged, leading my next step in the research project to creating an instrument. I created this instrument to record my data and findings when observing the students in the different instructional settings. I created a different chart for each instructional opportunity to keep all my data separate from one another. It was easier for me to compare the different charts this way. When creating my charts, I had them all to look identical. In each chart, I included the instructional type, the duration, the task students were given, and if they completed the task or not. I observed students doing different tasks in each engagement category to get a variety of data. On the right-hand side of my slide, I have one of my charts that I use to collect my data. When observing students, I observed ages between 6 and 8 years old. I observed in several different classrooms ranging from 1st through 3rd grade, and I also observed in 2 schools. Between these 2 schools, I was able to collect all my data for my thesis research project. The first engagement instructional opportunity that I have here is small group engagement. When collecting data for this particular study, I looked at if students could complete a given task or assignment while working in a small group with their peers. The results showed that 80% of the time, the students were engaged while in small groups, but the other 20% of the time, students are not engaged and they were unable to complete their task. Overall, I would say small group had very good results when looking at student engagement. Now on to independent data. I collected data when students had a task or assignment that they had to complete by themselves. The results showed that 43% of the time students could complete the assignment, but the other 50% of the time students were not engaged, meaning they did not complete their given task or assignment. Therefore, more than half of the time students were unable to complete the task independently due to lack of engagement. When watching and collecting data for this particular instructional opportunity, I noticed how students were getting off task. One student kept talking to the person beside him who was already finished. Another student sat there for 20 minutes and had completed nothing. And another student was talking to the person beside him, and I noticed him getting up and down many times to get different things out of his backpack. These things led to students being off task and not engaged, ultimately leading them to not be able to complete their given assignment. Technology is the next chart. I observed students doing a technology assignment to see if they could complete something online. These results show that 66% of the time, students were able to complete their given task or assignment online. However, the other 34% of the time, students were unable to do this. The students that were not able to complete the online assignment, I took note of how they were not able to complete this. The technology assignment I've observed here, the students had to write one sentence about a pollinator of their choice and find a picture of this pollinator. The students that were getting off task were doing a variety of different things. One student was on a completely different website and not in their Google Classroom Google document at all, while another student spent all her time looking up different pictures of different pollinators instead of just picking one and moving on. Now on to flexible seating all day. These results were not positive towards student engagement. Only 25% of the time were students engaged when using flexible seats all day. 75% of the time, students did not complete their assignment. The group of 4 students I observed were on the carpet doing a center activity. One girl was doing cartwheels in an empty space and another boy was laying down, showing that oftentimes using flexible seating all day does not engage students. However, flexible seating part-time had very different results. These results were the best in my study. At 100% of the time, students were engaged and able to complete their assignment when in a flexible seat for part of the day. I learned many things through this study through observing different engagement instructional opportunities. The first being that flexible seating part-time is much better for student engagement than flexible seating all day. I also learned that students working in small groups tends to engage students more than when they work independently. However, my technology engagement results were not as easily observed, therefore my data here is inconclusive. While I got good results in my study, there were things that made this limited. For example, I only observed in 3 classrooms, meaning I did not see a wide variety of classes or students. I also only observed in grades 1st through 3rd. Therefore, I do not have elementary engagement results from grades kindergarten, 4th, or 5th. Another thing, I only saw 2 schools out of the thousands of elementary schools. And lastly, I was unsure of the activity or assignment that I would be observing on the day that I went into the classroom. I was not able to control the engagement instructional opportunity that I would see. Therefore, these limited experiences could have made a difference in my data. I have learned so much that I will take with me to my future classroom and information that I will share with other educators. The first thing being that I would like to use flexible seating part-time in my classroom because I see how well students are engaged when using these seats for part-time of the day. I know the importance of students working in small groups with their peers, and infusing technology does promote engagement. However, independent work is an area that I want to do more research in because I know that there will be times in my classrooms where students have to work independently. In his research, Sabat connected learning and engagement, and therefore from my study, when elementary teachers implement flexible seating part-time, small groups, and infuse technology, students are more engaged and therefore learning. However, when implementing independent work, students are not engaged and their learning may suffer. Thank you.